It seems like a lot of big sources of hip-hop media went to sweep NF under a rug. At this rate, he's on his way to being like a mythical figure that no one wants to acknowledge, but is frequently cited time and time again. As for this channel, I suppose I already have something like an outcast perspective, seeing as I cover artists who are Christian and talk about God in their music. So I'm very excited to be talking about perception today, as I certainly think it's time NF gets his due props. Something I'd like to clarify is that while I enjoy NF's music, it's on a rather casual level, so I'm not an expert or highly knowledgeable when it comes to his stuff. For you people out there who really relate to NF, let me know along the way if I missed something, as this will mostly be just my opinions. With all that being said, let's get into this. As is common with many hip-hop albums recently, there's not a solid storyline to this project. It's a lot of different songs with different angles and perspectives that all mesh together to form something like a collective body of art. Conceptually, NF makes this work quite smoothly, as most of his songs have a lingering sense of anger, regret, or feelings of betrayal at the very least. While the songs don't necessarily have anything to do with each other, they all feel like they come from the same artist who struggles with baggage. And if I had to summarize, that's probably what I'd say this album deals with: baggage. Whether it's the baggage of romantic relationships, parental relationships, or even that of friendships and business relations, it's all here in this project. NF doesn't strike me as a particularly emotional or angry individual. Rather, what I see in this project is the open and unabashed expression of what it feels like to carry all of this baggage. I appreciate NF's authenticity and the fact that he doesn't put on a face for his music. This album is self-expression, and as much as I feel he makes music for all the people out there who hurt like him, I also feel he makes music for himself. It's truly his own canvas where he pours his blood, sweat, and tears, because he releases all of his pent-up frustrations and emotions on these tracks. In addition to that, these songs tend to make sense in their reasoning. For example, in the song Let You Down, NF relates the pains and struggles of his strained relationship with his parents. The pain of not being understood and betrayed, even by your own family, perhaps the only people in this world who really ought to have your back. As another good example, the song Outcast has an overlying angry feel to it. What exactly he's angry about could be multiple things, but it seems one source of anger has to do with the current state of mainstream hip-hop and his perception that it's of a lower quality than before. These are only a couple of examples, but whenever I pick up on a strong emotion in this album, I can almost always trace it to the song itself. It may not actually be the lyrics themselves, but the feelings and thoughts they bring that makes NF emotional at times. A good comparison would be if I were to write an article on police brutality. It's not something I've ever experienced, but the act of writing about it may provoke deep-seated emotions and thoughts that end up making me angry, even if the words in my article themselves are not very angry sounding. Personally, this project as a whole feels like someone who feels misunderstood or betrayed by society, and goes to his special place to vent all of the things that weigh on his heart. It's one of the most human-sounding projects I've heard recently, being neither optimistic nor cynical. He's simply venting and talking about how he feels, and it's refreshingly organic. Naturally, there's not a whole lot to say constructively about this album's production. Since it was handled by a very large record label's resources, everything on the album sounds incredibly professional and smooth. Even the mixing on his voice is nothing short of well done. Speaking of his voice, I think this is a notable quality of NF, being that he has a voice like few others in the scene of hip-hop. There's a raspy tinge to it, the sound of pain and weariness. I won't skirt around the fact that NF is compared to Eminem probably more than any other white rapper is, and while I understand the comparison, I think voice is a key factor separating these two. Although initially I did think of NF as sounding very similar to Eminem, it wasn't until I very closely studied this album that I started to notice a difference. When I hear NF's voice on these tracks, he sounds like someone who is learning how to manage his struggles. It's an uphill battle and it's tiresome, but he's learning to manage. From what I remember of Eminem, he sounded more so as if he were still in the midst of things that plagued him, and his voice sounded more crazed in a sense. It's as though he was made frenzied or hyper-vigilant by these things ailing his soul, and so he had that, rather than NF's worn-out, slightly raspy style. Again, it is a valid comparison, as the two are both capable of bringing an intense energy to a track, and both can get creatively explicit in the way they describe things. However, in one of my favorite songs off the album, Dreams, I think NF sounds nothing like Eminem, as he sings with great sobriety over a contemplative and mellow beat. I think one of NF's greatest weapons is that he can genuinely sing, and the melodies he creates in that song showcase that talent in my opinion. Another great song, 3am, has NF rapping noticeably slower, but within that song and as well as a few others, I see a new and consistent style emerging, a cross between rapping and singing. To clarify what I'm getting at, this style is present in songs like Lie, If You Want Love, and You're Special. The more NF showcases his singing voice, the more he steadily carves out his own lane in my opinion. There's absolutely artists who have a similar singing voice, but you just don't see them around in this hip-hop genre, so I think that's why it makes NF unique. While the ominous and explosive rapping tracks on this album, such as Intro 3, Outcast, Green Lights, and Destiny are great in their own right, I can't help but feel that NF's strongest suit is a balance between hard-hitting rap and soft but soul-pained singing. I really think that's why the most popular song off this album is Let You Down, a song that strongly showcases this balance I'm talking about. Although, maybe having both the angry rapping and the calmer style is part of what draws listeners to NF. Fans have loved NF wildly from the beginning, and they never really stopped loving him either. In fact, he's increased his audience exponentially with each project, to the point where it's almost unheard of. So I suppose the question here is not if NF has continuity in his music, but rather, how does NF do it effectively? I like to think that NF keeps it simple but interesting. If you watch some of his music videos for this project and past albums, you'll see that NF never really goes for that stuff that messes with your brain. You can clearly see what's going on, and it usually matches the song. On top of that, NF references past projects and videos in his newer stuff, so he creates two parallel universes in a sense. In one universe, you have the casual listeners like me, who probably don't pick up on a lot of callbacks and references. We enjoy the music and the art of the video and keep it going. But in another universe, you have the more involved listeners, who closely watch everything and are absolutely delighted when they see new things tie in with old things. It's an interesting case of the best of both worlds, as NF can draw in new listeners with an interesting sound and art direction, while simultaneously pulling dedicated listeners further in. Some artists call for serious attention to detail, while other artists prevent things from getting too deep and full of twists, keeping their music fairly simplistic. NF has chosen the middle route and opted for a balance between the two, and I think he manages that balance quite effectively. There are many ways to tackle continuity, and with NF, we see the idea ring true that moderacy is key. It's not the only method out there, but it certainly works. Let me clarify again that I'm not a very involved listener when it comes to NF. I say this because it means I don't have a lot of bias towards his music. So this is coming from an outsider perspective when I say that I highly respect his methods and presentation. He actually cares for the people who are immersed in his music, but he doesn't make it difficult for newcomers or more casual listeners to start enjoying it either. He's steadily carving out a new signature style with vocals that are highly uncommon in hip-hop. His production is top of the line too, so it can really compete sonically with many of the bigger name albums out there. It's a great album, but there is a possible problem. For the listeners who much prefer NF's explosive and high energy rap style, they may be disappointed by the new and persistent style of singing and rapping that NF has used throughout this album. For the listeners who much prefer NF's calmer combination of rapping and singing, they may be put off by NF's occasionally hardcore demeanor that feels more along the lines of what Eminem might have done. Either of those groups can still enjoy the album, but there are quite a few songs in both cases that each group might not enjoy. I suppose it's really the biggest drawback to moderation and having as balanced a project as this. At the end of it all, how much enjoyment there is to be had is really left up to the listener's own perception. All that being said, it's still balanced done right, and I commend this artist for that. Well done, NF. Now it's time for all of you listeners to sound off. How did you guys perceive this album? Make sure to let me know in the comments below. Thank you for watching this all the way through, and until next time, peace out.